hear from two programs. The first is Pyoe Pin in Myanmar, and then the second is Veep in Vietnam. So we'll have two presenters from Pyoe Pin, Gerry, Fox, and Georgior, and then half an hour for discussion, and then we'll move on to Vietnam. So Gerry?
Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, I want to talk to you about Pyoe Pin in Myanmar. Pyoe Pin's it's a governance program, and it works through issues. The intention is that if we can identify issues that you can build to scale, that you can have significant impact. And in order to do that, you need to identify issues around which you can build inclusive partnerships. And those partnerships including civil society, but also government and also private sector, recognizing there's three legs of a stool that we need to have where the rubber hits the road with the private sector engagement, with government and also with private sector. Now, if we are able to develop these to scale, those coalitions can also start to inform or affect the rules of the game. So what we're aiming at is not only to have significant impact, but also sustainability. In order for sustainability, we need to be affecting the rules of the game. And when I talk about the rules of the game, we're talking about things like how is tax defined, how are markets developed, how are resources shared, these kinds of rules. And not only from a point of view of legislative rules or policy, but also the way people act, the way people's attitudes and behavior. And through the Pyoe Pin Programme, there have been a number of successes. For example, if we talk about rules of the game in the rule of law sector, there's examples of where now for the first time you have solicitors and lawyers being able to access people who are on remand, which influences obviously their ability to no longer have forced confessions. Also reduces the number of cases that are acquitted, or should I say reduces the sentences and also increases the numbers that are acquitted. There are other cases within education, for example, where we heard earlier this morning around, yes, there have been great gains from building institutions and schools, but what we're really talking about is learning. So how do we improve the learning? And one of the successes, I think, of this kind of approach has been looking at how you build in competency-based standards into teaching, and you look at the way school management is improved, and you build around around the coalitions of different education actors. Now, what I really want to focus on today is fish. Now, fish particularly in Rakhine. Now, fish is, it's an interesting issue, and within this program, what we've been supporting is a number of things, and some of the successes, I would say, are that there now is a law within Rakhine, which is probably one of the best laws in Southeast Asia on fish. It enables for the first time for management of fish from both co-management from civil society, fishers and government, and it has reduced conflict and is starting to see improvements in fish stocks through these processes. Now, how is this done? I mean, when you talk about fish, why pick on fish? And we've talked a lot about earlier on about how decisions are made, how issues are chosen. And in this particular case, we went to Rakhine. We talked to a range of different actors. They were in the private sector, in the public sector, in the fishers, the communities, the civil society actors, environmentalists, and you try and identify what is an issue which is inclusive, where there's likely to be institutional change, where you can support changes to the rules of the game, but you can also improve incomes, you can reduce conflict, these types of key issues. So I just want to check how much time I've got. So in this particular case, we narrowed down over a period of time what was a key issue, and we ended up with the economy and then fish, because fish within within Rakhine is a key driver. And so from there, we said, okay, well, if fish is important to all these different actors, then what do we need to know? We need to understand the political economy. So you need to understand the big picture of nationally around fish. We also need to understand the actors and the different interests. We need to understand the linkages between the different actors. We need to look at the state. We need to look at civil society. We look at uncivil society. We need to look at the military. We need to look at all of these different actors that are working within and around the aspects of fish. And through this understanding, try and identify whether or not there's a positive balance of power. I mean, if it's captured, it'll be very, very difficult to move. But if you can see there's sufficient incentives from different actors, and that we can work with the incentives of those different actors, then we're likely to be able to affect change. So our role in this very much is not to drive the process, but it's to be a broker or a facilitator to support different actors who are working in these areas, to work with their incentives, and they are the leaders of this process. Now, the key for us in terms of building, once we understand the different actors, is building various vertical and horizontal linkages between them. Because some actors clearly have very little access to power, and others have significant access to power. So if we can, through our different facilitation of these actors, provide support and facilitation, we can together build a coalition of interest that can drive change. I think I'm out of time. Yeah, okay, I've got 38 seconds and I'm nowhere near finished. But here, perhaps the best thing here now is to actually pass on. I'll pass on to Kyaw, who will actually describe the way this worked in the fisheries case. Thanks.
Thanks, Gerry. Okay. So in terms of this, I think it looks quite theoretical, and I will come into how it happens in the real world. Particularly in terms of the area, Rakhine, just a bit of background, is one of the second poorest area in the whole Myanmar, and where the political capture was very heavy, and we were, as we all know, under the military government for many years. So a lot of institutional practices and the way things are quite dominated by a few elites. So in terms of the way that how we really end up, as Gerry mentioned about the fish, it's actually quite critical for everyone, particularly from the politicians and also policymaker, government, also to the local communities. So, and when we got into the environment, there are different actors with their various interests, and they want different out of the game. And particularly when we really think about the development of the fisheries sector as a whole, is about how we change the way things are. Initially, the decision making is done by a few elites, and they want the way that how they make the law and the way that how they influence the practices in the way that they want. So we really need to think about the way that how we can really change the rule of the game. But as Gerry mentioned, it's not about us. We can't change the rule of the game, and we can't change anything happening in that environment. Particularly the key people who are actually leading the process have to make the change. So how do we do that? We have to really facilitate based on their interest, based on the issue they really care about, to come together and really drive the change forward. And for that, we invited a few key leaders who are related to fish, particularly parliamentary actors, government, civil society, the community fisheries. Of course, they have the different interests. Like one of the example is the tender, for example. Tender was previously heavily controlled by the government, and that tender actually provide only a few key elites that can benefit from the whole area. For example, one fishing ground area is just like $100,000. So it all captured by the elite, and they actually sub-grant to the communities. Communities suffer from that. How do you change that game? So you can only change the way how the law is structured. But is it end there? No, it's not enough yet. So you also have to increase the way that how the law is enforced, so that it is actually benefiting to the whole majority community. So for that reason, we bring all the key actors together and form a partnership, and that partnership define the part, how do we improve the fishery governance. That includes the law. And then they actually trying to think about how we can inclusively change the law, and that includes the layers of activities, including the community consultation. In Rakhine, there is also conflict, so there are also Muslim areas. So some people have been trying very hard to be more inclusive about both communities, the Rakhine and Muslim. But since you have a very core objective together to benefit from the process, so of course that process includes all the community members, regardless of whether Muslim or Christian or Buddhist. So that creates a process of inclusion itself. So rather than creating just for the sake of making participatory to be inclusive. So within that process, the community demands their fishing rights. So which is about how the community can have access directly to the fishing ground. And through the law change process, they include the community fishery, where community have a direct access to the fishing ground. And second, the community also demanded the available mechanism for them to participate in the governance program or in the decision-making process. So within that Rakhine Fishery Partnership, there are different layers. The Community Fishery Association has a kind of way to make the decision together, not just only about Department of Fishery making the decision, everything. So which is a mechanism that Gerry just mentioned about co-management. So that practice also learned from the neighbor countries. So like Cambodia, Thailand, and other countries, how the practice has already happened. So that learning was also shared. The Cambodia government, for example, heavily involved in the process to support the whole law reform process itself. So through the governance, what are the results? So the whole governance mechanism changed dramatically. All are now making decisions about the fishery governance as a whole. And the second result is actually community having now direct access to their fishing ground. So that wasn't the case before. And the third is actually around the results of the lawmaking process itself. Since Myanmar is very new to democratic environment, Parliament is actually making their own decision to make the law. But now, because of that process influence, they are also making other laws to be more consultative and also consulted to the communities. And that influence also the union level, which is the national level government, in terms of how the fishery law can also be reflected in the whole country law. So these are the processes. There are also a lot of other ripple effects and impact of the programs, but at the same time, I also want to now highlight a bit about what are the key learnings here. So applying, doing development differently. I think that starts the way how we think differently as well. So I used to give some example about when we started this fish program. So there's a kind of similar old story about, you don't give fish to the people, you have to teach how to fish. But the story doesn't end there. It's also about where to fish and how the fishing ground is decided for whom to share the resources. So those kind of things are very political. And that kind of things are also about the way that how things happen on the ground. You have to really understand that. So first is you really have to emphasize on the whole political economy environment, where you understand who are the different actors, and you define the way that how you can really work along that path of change, which is not just only about partnership as we conventionally think about NGO or civil society. We have to think partnership broadly than what we used to think. And the second thing about the learning is when the process is inclusive and the process is defined by the inclusive actors who are actually caring about their issues, you're likely to affect change more easily. And again, it's owned by the local. And it also talk about the leadership more. This morning I heard about the autonomous, which is very key, but at the same time, it's ownership. So we want to drive our own process. We want to make our own decision, which is about self-determination, which is not just only about me or you, it's about all of us to make the decision together, which is a common goal to improve how we actually see the world together, and which is actually about how we can really improve the whole development concept and how we can really reach the goal out together. So for all these areas are all critical in terms of looking at how we can do the development differently. Thank you very much.